Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about the forms of regular verbs in English and Spanish from a contractive analysis perspective. First, it is important to understand what contractive analysis is. It is a method used to compare two language in order to identify their similarities and differences. This helps learners understand how language works and why they make mistakes when learning a new language. In this case, we are focusing on regular verbs. Regular verbs are formed verbs that follow predictable patterns when they are conjugated. This means they don't change in irregular ways, which makes them easier to learn. Regular verbs exist in both English and Spanish, but they are formed differently in each language. Understanding these differences is very important because it helps improve grammar and avoid common errors.
Now, let's look at regular verbs in English. In English, regular verbs are relatively simple to form. To express the same past tense, we usually add id to the base form of the verb. This rule applies to most of verbs, which make it easier for learners to recognize patterns. For example, work, work, play, played, clean, cleaned. However, there are some small spelling changes that we need to consider. For example, if a verb ends in e, we only add the, live, live. If a verb ends in a consonant plus y, we change y to e and add id. Study, studied. Also, pronunciation is important. The id ending can sound different depending of the verb. Sometimes it sounds like the, or id. For example, worked, played, wanted. Another important point is that English verbs do not change depending of the subject in the past tense. For example, I worked, she worked, they worked. The verb remains the same for all subjects, which makes English simpler compared to Spanish. Because of this simplicity, learners can focus more on meaning and sentence structure instead of memorizing many verbs forms.
This slide explains the basic anatomy of a Spanish verb. The main takeaway is that verbs are like puzzles made of two pieces, a root and variable ending. For example, take the verb hablar. When you remove the R, you get the root able. For the reason to talk about the past, you attach different endings to the root depending on who performed the action. For example, you say, yo hablé in Spanish, but in English is I spoke, tú hablaste, you spoke, or ellos hablaron, they spoke. In short, in English, the ending of the verb is a GPS that tells you exactly who did the action and when it happened. This slide compares English and Spanish to show why Spanish verbs require a bit more attention to detail. Rules. English is simple. You usually just add it or the, depends of the verb for the past. However, Spanish has three groups are, ir, each with its own set of rules. The subject. In English, the verb stays the same. For example, I worked, they worked. In Spanish, the verb changes for every person. For example, yo trabajé, ellos trabajaron. Pronouns. Since the verb ending change in Spanish, the pronoun I, you, he is optional. The verb itself tells you who is talking. In English, you must use the pronoun, or the sentence won't make sense. In fact, English is about consistency, while Spanish is about inflection, changing the word to pack in more information.
Common errors. Common errors represents areas where the structure of Spanish and English do not conceal, leading the student to make a systematic mistake out of pure habit. For example, students often make mistakes because they transfer rules from the Spanish into English. For example, she worked yesterday. The correct form is she worked yesterday. She go to school. The correct form is she goes to school.
In conclusion, understanding the forms of regular verbs and English and Spanish is essential for language learning. By comparing both languages, the students can identify differences, avoid common mistakes, and improve their grammar. Constructive analysis helps both students and teachers develop better learning strategies and achieve more effective communication. Thank you for your attention.
Now we are going to do a Kahoot activity to help you learn and practice. This activity will allow to reinforce what you have studied and in a fun and interactive way. It also helps you learn from your mistakes and remember the correct forms more easily.